Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Black Friday and High Volume Readiness webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, thank you to our event sponsor, iOCO. My name is Nastasia Arendse, and I will be your host for the next hour. We do encourage you to actively participate in this session, and you can use the chat function to ask questions or make comments. And of course, if social media is indispensable to you, you can use our event hashtag, which is hashtag performance engineering or hashtag performance testing. Please note that the recording will be made available to you at the end of the session, and we'll email it to you. So if there's any parts of the recording or the discussion that you want to go back to and have a listen, you can definitely do that. So with so many, high volume activations, Black Friday being one of them, the holiday shopping season can be a welcome boost for organizations' bottom line. However, we know that if your systems aren't stable or scalable and secure enough to handle that massive spike in traffic or transactions, you will lose out to your competitors. And that is something that we all want to avoid. So the speakers that we have today, we've got Lila Pitton, who's a performance and security testing advisor. And we also have Caswell Mkonto, who's going to be joining us a little bit later on. He's the head of testing at Woolworths. Starting off with Lila, she is our first speaker for today's session. A bit of a background on Lila. Lila's main business expertise is in the IT domain, with a special focus on improving business performance and delivery through innovative solutions, improved ways of thinking, and through effective leadership. So she's going to be talking to us about the key concepts and considerations and approaches. Lila, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nastasia. So, hi everyone. So, let me quickly share my screen. 1 second. All right. So, Nastasia, you can see my screen, correct? Just testing.
Yes, I can see it.
All right. So, morning again, everyone. Thank you very much, Nastasia. So, in the next couple of minutes, I would like to talk to you all on the subject of Black Friday readiness, why performance matters, and really what is the basics of performance engineering, and we'll then move on to some practical case studies and how iOCO assisted clients. So Black Friday is obviously one of the biggest sales events and is a massive revenue generator for many companies. Traditionally, during that period of time, which could be 1 or more days, people will be queuing.
Hi, sorry, Lila, you're not sharing your slides. You're sharing your browser. If you could change across to your slides.
Okay, 1 second. Apologies for that. Technical difficulties here. There we go. Is that fine?
That is perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So like I was saying, it's traditionally people would be going to physical stores and queuing at shops. But with the recent pandemic that have hit the world, a lot of organizations have had to move to the digital platform, and they have digitalized their organization. With the digitalization world and the world of IT, what does this Black Friday event means? It means a period and a spike in amount of user traffic on your infrastructure, a high volume of data transactions and access to multiple information and storage of information. It also means a spike in the amount of users logged on concurrently on your platform. So with the event looming in soon in November, a quick question to ask yourself if you will be participating in this event is, are you confident that your infrastructure can handle this spike without negatively affecting the responsiveness of your application? And the second fun question that I always ask people is, do you know how many users can concurrently check out and purchase item at the same time on your platform? So that is a good indicator of how ready, how confident you are for Black Friday. And on this note, we also have a quick poll question. We'll just launch it now, just to ask you as the audience, what are your views on investing in performance for events like Black Friday or for general use in your organization? So if we could just launch that.
All right, the poll has been launched and we can see people voting. The question says, do you think it's worth investing in actively testing and monitoring the performance of applications, especially for Black Friday sales? So we'll give people about 30 seconds to a minute so we can get those results. Okay, so the results read 88% say yes and 11% say not sure. And obviously nobody voted no. So Leela, how do you interpret that poll?
Now that's a great improvement. In the past, people would still have doubts about investing in performance, and it's great that people are now seeing the value of it. And for the 11% you said, right, of people who are not sure, we will talk about why performance matter on the next slide in actual fact. So let's go into that conversation. So why does performance matter? At its core, at its heart, if I can say, we are aiming to proactively manage and mitigate business and IT risk. And I will be covering 6 main themes as to why performance matter. There may be more, but I would like to just cover those for you, those main ones. So the first one being, as an organization, you want to ensure the best customer experience on your platforms, being mobile apps and online websites and other platforms that you use, or the channels that you use, to make sure that you maintain your customer base. So customer retention is very closely linked to how the customer experiences your digital platform. There are statistics out there that shows how, and you can speak for yourself, I believe you've experienced that. If you go on a website that is too slow to load or is taking forever to process certain transactions, it is statistically proven that 40% of people tend to abandon the transaction and 80% of people will never return. On to the next point, it has a direct impact on your revenue. There is this very, very popular quoted research done by the Aberdeen Group, and it's called the cost of the 1 second delay. A 1 second delay can cost you millions of rands if you think about it over a period of time. So in a day, for example, if you're making 100,000 per day for all transactions happening, and if you can quantify the cost of 1 second being lost, and now multiply that for a whole year, that's how you see the impact on your revenue, on your bottom line. The next 2 point talks to scalability and availability. So as you're moving into the digital world and you're moving into the cloud or a hybrid type of infrastructure, it is quite important to understand that you want to ensure that as your customer base increases, your organization can handle that and scales efficiently. Not only that, you want to make sure as an organization that you have budgeted in advance for the scalability of your organization. So that's important. The other point on availability talks about the fact that we live in a hyper-connected world, and we also live in a world where we are expecting those applications and platforms to be accessible on different devices from different locations across the world. So how do you ensure now that your applications and digital platforms can be available 24/7, right? The last 2 points onto why performance matter is the first one is disaster planning and data analytics. So disaster planning, like any good organization, you want to make sure that you have a good business continuity plan in place. And disaster planning will be one of the activities that you do to ensure that your business is resilient. As part of disaster planning, you often do some performance testing. For example, what happens if one of your main data center goes down or a specific infrastructure is corrupted or failed? How does your system respond under this stressful situation? So that's on the disaster planning. Last but not least, why does performance matter is on the data analytics side. We live in a world now that is driven by information. We use information, we use data to make the right decisions, and data analytics becomes very, very important for businesses. We want to, by having the right level of performance engineering discussions in your organization, you will be monitoring all kinds of statistics, and those statistics will help you as an organization to get to a more prescriptive and AI-driven approach. What does that mean? You want to get to a point where Metrics just tell you what needs to be fixed right now to a point of what do I need for the future. So these are all critical points for you to consider. Going back to that first point on customer experience and retention, from a business standpoint, if we step away from the IT world and look at it from a lens of the business world, it is noted that the world is changing in terms of how customers experience platform and how customers approach the e-commerce world. So there was a traditional approach where people will have this loyalty to certain platforms, but now we live in a world where people are looking for instant gratification. They are constantly experiencing, discovering new platforms. If you look at this picture here on the slide, they're constantly discovering new platform, looking at them, evaluating them, and then using and purchasing things. But they are constantly evaluating against your competitors out there on the market. So IT obviously support that. And this picture would be very familiar to the IT people, as in it looks very similar to the DevOps picture, where we want to drive this continuous delivery to meet this need, this customer need for faster time to market. So performance matters in supporting this change in the customer experience. So organization needs to make sure that they can really drive the experience of customers to be continuous, a continuous improvement life cycle. It needs to be constant experience, so things must not just suddenly be up or down, or response time be suddenly slow and fast. It needs to be customized. It needs to be available on different channels and platforms as well. So that's very important to understand from the business world and how IT needs to support that as well. All right, so that was just quick discussion on why performance matter. Let's now jump into the next subject, which is what is performance engineering and what does that whole world look like? To simplify it, I just put this picture for you. At its core, in the performance world, you will be driven by a set of performance requirements, business requirements in terms of what is expected. It will ideally be business process aligned, and you will have a series of core critical business processes that you will note as non-negotiable that has to perform. So that's business process aligned. You will ideally have a strategy, and obviously at its core, you aim to detect, diagnose, and resolve your performance issues, right? As an organization, you will also have a set of goals, aims, and objectives. I've already discussed some of them as part of the subject of why performance matter. But for example, in your organization, you may have a service level agreement that says that all application on click must have a response time of 3 to 5 seconds. So that will be your aims and objective. Another objective for your organization could be to support scalable business model or to have an improved customer experience over time. Right, so that's another big chunk of that performance world. Driven by those core requirements and aims and the objective of your organization, you have this supporting element of performance test. So the performance test, really, there are multiple types of scenarios that you run and you execute to check the performance of your application. We'll talk about what is performance test just now, but just so you understand at a high level, we have different types of scenarios that we may run to test your application from different angles. For example, if you're testing a spike test, it means that you will have an expected amount of users on your platform, and then suddenly you will simulate a burst of activities, of transactions in a small amount of time, and then it goes down again. So that would be a spike. Versus a soak test, which is more around testing things over time. So what happens if I'm constantly accessing a specific transaction for 24 hours straight? How does the application respond to that? So there's different scenarios that you will cater and factor in according to the aims and objective of your project, of your application, etc. And to support all of that, you also have a big important part called the performance monitoring aspect to things. So whilst you're testing and getting those type of scenarios and you're seeing how things are reacting, you want to also get metrics and reports, so statistics. So there's different kinds of monitoring as listed on this slide. The one that I would like to just give an example would be the simple one like CPU utilization. So that talks to the infrastructure aspect of things. So you will have CPU utilization or how much memory is being consumed. But you also have more advanced type of monitoring, like simulating your users. You want to see the response time, how is the traffic happening, how are the web pages loading. So there's all kinds of monitoring that supports that. Last but not least, you will also have your technology. You cannot be in the performance world without your bunch of technology. That will be commercial and also your open source type of software. And some are listed on this slide here. Right, so that's just in a nutshell how this performance world looks like, right? But how does it apply in the SDLC? And let's just move on to the next discussion of what is performance engineering in a software delivery lifecycle. So performance engineering is really a discipline, a practice that is everyone's responsibility. So first of all, we want the developers, the architects, the testers, the operation team, everyone, the project managers, everybody has a role to play in performance engineering. It's a set of practice, techniques, and activities that happens from the time you initiated a project, you got a business case, and you start planning for it to design. As you can see on the slide, you have your plan, design, construct, build, all the way to the operation. So that's where you take the application to production. It's now live, accessible to customers. So you want to make sure that performance activities are happening all the way. The two main ones that we talk about in performance engineering, which we will cover now, is performance testing and performance monitoring. And the key aspect in performance engineering is we are trying to shift those activities right and left. So certain activities would traditionally happen just in specific phases of the software development lifecycle. An example would be testing. Traditionally, testing would happen just in the QA world. And what we are saying now is we want testing to happen on the left-hand side. So developers must also test. And we want those scripts that we created for testing to also be utilized where applicable in the operations world, in the production world as well. So that's the shift right and shift left. Similarly, so that's on the performance testing side. And the same happens with monitoring as well. Traditionally, it would happen mostly in production. We will monitor what's happening. And what we are saying now is we should leverage monitoring and use the statistics to drive the right type of testing that needs to happen. And also leverage those real users. So there's advanced monitoring that are available in the production environment. We want to leverage that as well as part of testing and to drive the right decision-making earlier in the software delivery lifecycle. Quick step back, just in case. So what is performance testing? Performance testing is an activity that happens as part of quality assurance. It's a type of testing that happens to simulate users in the live, how they would be interacting with application and platform, with the objective of testing the concurrency of your platform. So how many users can log in at the same time, how the platform reacts to volume of data, and how it reacts also to basically throughput and all of those, and response time as well. So all these different elements is what we aim to test during performance testing. And the monitoring aspect is really the heartbeat of your application. We want to check the health of your application and how it's responding. And we use metrics. So just like your pulse, you have a specific metric for that. We have specific metric in the performance world as well. Like I said, an example would be response time or your CPU utilization. Is it 90%? Is it 50%? We have international benchmark of what it should ideally be. For example, we could say that a response time should be around 3 seconds. That's an international benchmark. And we now test that whether your application meets those international standards or not. So that's how performance engineering happens in the whole SDLC. The other role players, like for example, the project managers, the project office team will ensure that performance requirements are included. The designer team will ensure that they design the application with performance in mind. Developers will ensure that, so during the build and construct phase, developers will ensure that they are factoring in performance when they're writing the code, and they are also doing some unit testing for performance as well. Architecture team gets involved as well, and you want quality gauge to be built across the whole chain of events. So across the software delivery lifecycle, you want performance engineering to happen across the whole lifecycle. How does it actually practically look like? That is just an example of how the process flow could be looking like in an organization. This is a sample. The two things to note here is that we want to have continuous testing and continuous monitoring. So this picture is not necessarily the be-all, end-all. It will be customized according to the culture of the organization, according to the type of delivery model that you have in place. But these are just to give you an indication how we start very early in the testing lifecycle. It's from the design phase. We already start risk assessment, verifying the documentation out there, unit testing things, writing the script and having a nice lifecycle, testing across different phases of software delivery, from the development to integration, etc. And you will see also the monitoring aspect and how basically you are driving the monitoring to feed back into your testing, and whatever you're testing to feed back into adjusting your monitoring as well. So it's a healthy feedback loop to adjust on both sides. And that is how you get to optimize your world and constantly drive the right culture in your organization. Right, so to summarize the past two slides that I talked about, traditionally we had a dev world, a QA world, and an ops world. And we had chunks of testing performance activities happening and owned by specific areas. What we are now saying is all the different departments need to collaborate with one another, and we need to shift right and shift left, and we need those different activities to happen end to end. Your organization should also look at how you want a performance team to be engaged, how you want to drive performance in your organization. Do you want a separate team, or do you want to incorporate people just on demand for a specific project, or will it be basically incorporated in specific business units? So there's different ways of approaching this discussion, and it's up to the organization and their strategy to define that as well. To help you understand where you are on your performance journey, we often share with our clients just this very simplified maturity model, which is in the form of a pyramid. And we explain to people that usually when you start embarking on this performance journey, you usually start in a very reactive world. So you start from reactive to becoming more proactive, right? And usually it starts with you being in a firefighting mode. From past experience, usually performance testers are involved after the fact. So something went terribly wrong in production, something crashed, or there are incidents happening in production, people are calling call centers. So now suddenly you're in firefighting mode and you get involved to assist. At some point, after this firefighting mode, you start seeing the value of performance, you start incorporating that in your organization, you start driving performance goals, you start driving performance tests, and you start monitoring your application as well at the base. So you start having this health check of application that needs to be tested from a performance standpoint and needs to be monitored as well. Once you pass that phase, you start getting into that optimizing phase. So you've got a base set up in terms of your process, and now you start leveling up, if I can say that. Leveling up means you start having more advanced monitoring, better type of technologies to help you with testing, drill down more into your different scenarios that you test, and you start correlating information, you start correlating information together and start seeing trends and start improving things as you go along. Most importantly in that phase, you start reusing your performance work and you start breaking it down, especially in the DevOps world. Like you would have specific scripts and you start simplifying it and really plugging it in the whole software delivery lifecycle. You may have sanity checks happening for performance, regression checks happening. In production, you may have some sanity performance checks that happens. So that's now where you start optimizing. The ultimate state is obviously where now it's a business drive. It's driven, it's an organizational culture Everybody sees the value of it. You no longer have to motivate and force things to happen. There's budget available for it. And the nice one is basically where the enterprise architecture drives performance as well. And they are constantly refactoring their whole guardrails, their whole infrastructure. So the IT backbone is constantly being revisited to optimize processes. So that's just a quick rundown of what the performance engineering world looks like. We'll now move on to some case studies. So iOCO helped a lot of clients, but I would like to just share two of the stories. The one story is in the telecommunications sector. So there, the organization called iOCO to assist with the Black Friday readiness. The reason we were called was because for the previous Black Friday, they had a serious issue on this purchase, on the checkout aspect of their platforms. At checkout, the application was crashing and people were having phones at a discounted rate and having features that they were not supposed to have, in summary. So that resulted in millions of rands being lost during that period of time. So they called us ahead of time for the next Black Friday. We did a bunch of testing for them, a bunch of monitoring. And we didn't just do performance testing. We did a lot of quality assurance type of activities, functional testing as well, making sure the functionality are 100% working. And the highlights was that we helped them have better user experience by testing the browser compatibility of the application. There was a couple of browsers that were not working efficiently. We helped test the resilience of the backend system to ensure that bulk orders had above 95% success rate, which was a massive improvement for them. And obviously from a response time, we helped them as well. And they had in some of the processes, there was a reduction in response time, an improvement in response time by 50%. And that was really, really a great example of how performance helped them. And they didn't have a loss of income again for that Black Friday. The next story talks to an insurance sector organization that was on a digital transformation journey. So as you know, most organizations are now on this digitalization drive or modernization drive. So that specific organization was changing all their old system to new systems. But these new systems, with the new way of working in IT, the model was a high integration type of landscape, multiple components needing to integrate with one another. So the performance team were brought a year after they started development and were asked to help benchmark their platform, which was done. And through this activity, we picked up design-related issues and architectural-related issues that were more long-term type of problems that needed resolving. So through this activity, we were able to hand over the whole performance engagement to the enterprise architect team, and their major responsibility was to mitigate the risk. They couldn't resolve all the risk immediately, but they were able to manage and mitigate the risk and make changes over the longer period of time. So that's how performance helped in those two instances. And that's really it on my side, guys. Thank you very much. Handing over back to you, Nastasia, for the next section.
Thank you so much, Leela, for that very informative, presentation. And I've got some questions that I've thought of at the top of my head. If any of the delegates have questions that you want to ask Leela or you want to ask Caswell, you're more than welcome to type them into the chat facility, and we'll unpack those questions a little bit further. Just before I welcome Caswell, Leela, perhaps you can answer this one. What do you find to be the main catalyst that drive organizations to, approach performance testing? Is it because, they experience significant or adverse performance issues, or is it because there was an influence of people who infused performance engineering into the company's culture? What has been your experience so far?
So for the past 10 years, if I took 10 years back, most of the time performance team was involved after the fact. So they would have gone live with the application and experienced a direct impact on RAN. So it's a loss of revenue. And through that loss of revenue or reputational damage, so if it's affecting their reputation or there's a loss of revenue, then they see the value, because it's quite, sometimes it can be an expensive activity. So the investment, the upfront investment is not always bought in by the business. They don't buy into it. So they need hard facts to motivate why they need performance. So these are the type of hard facts that happen. They either monitor what's going on in production, monitor the amount of incidents that happens, and then you have that. In other instances, you do have those forefront thinkers that are having a lot of software that are customer facing and that have a priority on having the best customer experience. If they have that as their priority, then also they will engage with us to make sure that they can benchmark that.
All right, great. So I look forward to engaging with you and Caswell a little bit later in the Q&A. However, the next speaker that we're going to have is Caswell Mkonzo, who's the head of testing at Woolworths. Just a little bit about him. He is an experienced IT professional with over 20 years experience, primarily within quality assurance and testing. He has spent several of those years in test management roles for large corporates like Woolworths, Siemens, Discovery Health, Barclays, Metropolitan, and Old Mutual emerging markets. Without further ado, Caswell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nastasia, for the introduction, and thanks, Leila. That was a mouthful, and thanks for the crash course in performance engineering. I think I am ready to write an exam in performance engineering right now. I'm just going to give a brief introduction around our Woolworths approach with regards to performance testing. But more importantly, I think I just have to say that within our organization, we do not just do performance testing for Black Friday or peak periods. We see performance testing as something that has to happen throughout the year. Hence, we want to build a culture that throughout the SDLC, we do performance testing for the organization. What's our view with regards to performance testing and what drives us to basically do performance testing for our systems? I think the most important thing is customer experience. And everything that we do, we are customer centric, and the experience of our customer when they access our digital platforms is the biggest driver on why we do performance testing, why our system should perform at an optimal level and have a high availability at any time. I'm one person that if I go into a website, and I think Leila have said it very well, that when someone go into a website, try to do a transaction, and you get a delay in response, I often jump out and go to the next one where I can get the same item that I was looking for from the previous site that I went to, until I get the site which responds quicker. Then I will stay in, and then I'll transact, and then I'll move on. And when I want to purchase something again, I'll go to the very last one that gave me better performance where I did the last transaction. So, and that's the same thing even with our view when we look at our systems. We know that this is a highly competitive market in retail space, and we all want to keep the customers that we have and attract new customers, and more customer experience when they access our sites. It's what will keep the customers hooked up to our sites and will bring more customers into our site. The next point that I want to talk about is our organizational culture. We want to instill a performance culture within our development lifecycle. Leila mentioned that in the olden days, and when I started testing 20 years ago, I used to sit at the end of the value chain in terms of the SDLC, when everything is done, and then they say, now we want to go to production, but just before we go to production, we need to do some testing. And I'm a firm believer that when you do performance, you don't test to add performance on an application. you design application for performance, which means if you within your organizational culture, you test in the end, by that it's already too late. Because if the application is not built with performance from the beginning, your testing will just prove that your application will not perform. So Leila spoke about shift left, and that's something that we believe in, and it's something that we currently do within our organization, that we want to do our performance testing at a very early stage through the SDLC. And when is the earliest that you do your performance testing? Actually, through your design. You need to design your system with performance in mind, which means when you do your functional requirements, non-functional requirements, they have to consider what are actually your performance metrics that as soon as the development starts, the developers must think about and then must start developing with those metrics in mind and ensure that the system actually performs as it gets developed and throughout. And testing in the end, I believe that testing should be just a confirmation that the application has been designed with performance, and you shouldn't scramble at that point in time when you do your testing. More importantly, in our case, it's our partnerships that we have. The partnerships that I'm talking about is the toolings that we do, our tool selections, which partners that provide us the best tools that that we have to use to fulfill our mandate around performance testing. You cannot do performance testing without tools. Yes, there are open source tools that we look at, and those are part of our tool mix with commercial tools that we are using. And more importantly, within our partnerships, it's partners that provide us with best resources, whether it's human resources, to help us advance our performance testing goals. And iOCO has been one of our key partners in the last few Black Fridays. I have a very good relationship in working with them as far as last year's Black Friday, which we did a good job with regards to our performance testing. And I was actually very happy that throughout the Black Friday period, which is actually a month-long period, and when you sit in those WhatsApp groups where systems are being monitored, I think I sit with confidence that I am certain that the systems, the testing that we have put through the systems are going to withstand the peak period, whether it's the Black Friday, those spikes that, especially on that Black Friday day, when that spike goes up, people are scrambling to grab whatever is available. We're certain that our systems are not going to fall because they've gone through a thorough performance test. Then every time we still strive to continue. We do not sit and think that because we've done a good job in the previous year, then the next day is just going to be fine. When we go out of the peak period, the next thing that we do, we review what have we done, what could have we done better, and what are the improvements that that we can add to improve in the next cycle, and so it goes. So we always go through continuous improvement in terms of what we do, and that's actually what keeps us in our toes, because we know that every second, especially in the digital environment, every second the goals shift. So what you have done in the last hour, when someone comes an hour later, will experience something different. So we always look at how we improve our performance, and as part of continuous improvement, that actually helps us to be on top of our game. And everybody knows that our retail is actually on top of their game. And just a brief high-level approach in terms of what we do. And I'm not going to spend too much time because Leila, I think she spent a lot of time around this. It's our non-functional requirements gathering and definition. That's key, and that's actually our beginning of the journey, because before we even develop, before we even design systems, we must understand what are the non-functional requirements. And then when we jump into the next layer, it's our scenario creation that has to tie back into what was defined as part of our non-functional requirements. And we have to identify, obviously, the environment where we need to test. It is very important that in our non-functional test environment, it at least must be very close to our production environment so that we can get a like-for-like performance and so forth. And then we move into the next one, which is our execution and reporting. I think I've already have said enough with regards to how we do our performance testing, but in our reporting and our tuning, at the end of every cycle, we do produce reports, and as part of our reporting and monitoring is actually to look at what are the areas of improvement, where can we improve, which areas that requires more attention, and our reporting and tuning give us that, and it keeps our system to the best performance level. Thanks very much for the time, and I'll give back to Nastasia for the next phase.
All right, thank you, Caswell. And we'll have Caswell and Leela for this part of the conversation. And it's quite nice that we do have a lot of our attendees engaging with a lot of the information that you've brought forward, Leela. But there is a question that has come in, and perhaps you can answer this one. And Caswell as well, if you feel like you want to add on to some of the answers, please feel free to do so. The first question says, how do we drive the performance requirements to be defined from the functional documents, because we often don't find these requirements? Leela, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I can tell you an experience I've had. So again, just a practical one. When I work at one of the bank, they saw the value of bringing in performance testing, but it was not trickling down from the project office or from the enterprise program management. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes consistency. Everything is based on trust. To Caswell's part, it's all about partnership and relationships as well in the world that we work in. So you need to build the trust that this work matters. And eventually, I had session. I was in a position after maybe a couple of months, and even nearly a year, where we could go back to the project office team. We started meeting each people until you get to that top level, and then ask that person, please, can you make that non-negotiable, that everything that come out of this office has to include requirements, and this is how requirements needs to be written. Let's drive a conversation on what are the benchmark, what are the service level agreement you want to have across the board. And then it could be a best practice document, but you can definitely also have that conversation to ensure that the templates that they utilize, because obviously everybody leverages some form of templates, so you want their template to have those basic requirements in there and start that conversation.
Okay. Caswell, I mean, you were talking so much about Black Friday, and I'm curious to know some of the lessons you've learned from your past Black Fridays, that maybe there's one that comes to mind that you'd want to share.
Yes, there are so many lessons that we have learned. I think in the last 3 years, I have seen each and every year an improvement on how we do our preparations, especially from testing point of view. And I think the key one for me was basically to start early as part of our preparation. The next one, I think, which will answer one of the questions that the last question that Leila has just answered with regards to the lack of non-functional requirements. At the end of last year, Black Friday, I think one of the lessons learned and one of the improvement that we seek to do for this year was that we realized that we had to scramble to get some of the non-functional requirements. And at the end of the cycle, we said we need to actually create a non-functional requirements for Black Friday, because we know that happens every year, and we cannot be scrambling every year to gather requirements every time we have to do Black Friday. So for this year, it's different because we started early, and we actually have gathered the requirements that are needed, the non-functional requirements that we need to have the right matrices, to have the right non-functional requirements for our planning, for our execution, for performance testing. So those are some of the lessons that we have learned and we're implementing. And I do believe that at the end of this cycle, there are some of the lessons that we'll pick up, and then we will start implementing next year until we get better and better.
Okay. Leela, there's a question that says, what is the best tool to use for performance testing?
Okay, that's a tricky question. I could give the funny consultant answer, it depends. But actually, you have to first understand, if you recall that one slide I shared, what are the objectives you're trying to achieve? Then have a feasibility on the application landscape to understand the technology, the protocols. So I'm getting just on the technicality side, you want to do that feasibility. And accordingly, I check what skills you have in your organization. Do you have people that have development skills? What tools currently are present? Accordingly, you make that choice. Sometimes you can go open source. A lot of people like to use JMeter to begin their journey, or they want to use the enterprise level tools like Load Runner or Blaze Meter, those type of enterprise tools that have a massive library of protocols that it supports. So it's never there's never a one answer, because there's too many factors you have to consider. Budget being one of them, and skill sets being one of them.
Okay. Before I move to Caswell, there's another one that I think you can answer. It says, how do we map a performance test script to a functional test script using different tools?
Yeah, it's actually the other way around. What's going on right now in the world is, like, I've seen Smart Bear, for example, have offered the ability to have the test scripts written and then move it into an automated functional script becomes a performance script that can be leveraged for performance testing. That's what I'm trying to say. So there are some tools that offer that, but usually you cannot map you don't necessarily have that one-to-one mapping unless you started in the functionality side of things and then you moved into a performance world to replicate that functionality, not the other way around. Because remember, performance aims to replicate a user behavior, and they need the steps of how that functionality is being stepped through. So it's the other way around from my experience, and not all tools offer that, but more and more we are seeing that trend, like Selenium scripts, UFT scripts, like I said, Smart Bear scripts can be now leveraged in the performance world.
Okay. Caswell, my question is, I mean, a little bit earlier on, I asked Leela, in terms of moving towards performance testing, is it because it's incident driven, or is it because somebody comes in from a different organization with that experience and kind of infuses it into their new organization? The question then is, do you think that DevOps is a good way of entrenching a culture of performance and security testing within an organization, or are there other ways of socializing and bringing awareness to the importance of performance and security testing?
Well, that's a loaded question. I'll try to break it down. I think for me, the biggest thing is the organizational culture. You can have the best methodologies in the organization. If you don't have the culture of testing or the culture of performance testing, nothing's going to work. You can have DevOps, you can have Agile, you can do waterfall, and without the right culture, the right people to execute or to think ahead or to think performance, you won't be able to have that done. So for me, the first thing is to have the right culture within the organization. And when I joined Woolworths, obviously I came already being pro testing. I mean, when you spend 20 years within the testing industry, you live testing, you eat testing, you breathe testing. So I'll say part of that question is me coming from a different organization and having a performance culture already. It's something that, as part of my strategy, I've raised is that I would like us to have a performance testing capability. The good thing is that when I joined, there was already performance testing thinking within the organization. The performance testing was being done. It could perhaps not be at the level which I would have wanted when I joined, but at least I had a base to work from, to say, the organization is already doing performance testing. How do I enhance to what we have? When I saw Leila giving the maturity level, I already thought about, oh, when I joined, we're here, now we are here. And I saw that we're actually going up the ladder and towards the very top. So that's part of it. With DevOps and DevSecOps, what I like about it is that is the shift left mentality, because we're no longer waiting to the end. Because the minute you go DevOps, you want that continuous deployment and continuous delivery, which means you cannot wait. It's no longer the same mentality as waterfall, where you wait until the end and then you start doing those testing activities, which is already late. So you already infuse your security, your performance at a very early stages of your development. What does that mean? Still goes back to what I said earlier. It means your culture should already have set up for that DevOps methodology that you want to implement. And then you must be prepared, because it's not an easy thing to do. So everybody must pull together. You must have the right support. You must have the right skill set as well within the organization to be able to implement that DevOps culture and the performance testing as part of that. And I'm happy that I've seen a mindset shift within our organization with our digital transformation journey, our DevOps journey. It shows that we're already going into the right direction, and we're in line with what the world of IT is going in.
If I may just add to this, I just wanted to add to this, and Wilson asked a question earlier on if they're on the documentation, and I just want to tie it to this DevOps DevSecOps conversation. One of the great things I like about the DevOps DevSecOps world is QA people. I know Wilson's from the QA world and Dev world. We are now more empowered as a person to ask those questions in DevOps practices. Before, we were just stuck in this little bubble, and if there's no requirements, that's it. But now, I mean, I never allowed that to stop me. I always ask questions. But now in the DevOps world, you are definitely more empowered to have conversation, to collaborate cross divisions, and people are less threatened by you approaching them, because it's the nature of the whole DevOps world of continuous collaboration and all. Just wanted to add that little aspect as well. Love the empowerment aspect of the new world.
Yeah. Caswell touched on, some of the challenges that companies may experience when it comes to performance. I mean, he said, having a lack of tools and the lack of performance testing skills. Are there others that you can think of, Leela? I mean, one would think, maybe the lack of performance test automation or lack of available test data. Are there others that come to mind that organizations experience?
Well, the good old one in the quality assurance world is the availability of environments. Caswell, you can definitely attest to that. In all these years, we always have to ensure that we have a good environment for performance testing. You cannot be doing performance testing in a very limited environment only. You need to have the right environment to simulate your production experience. Otherwise, the data that you're getting, the good old saying, garbage in, garbage out. If you're doing performance testing in an environment that does not allow you to simulate production, what are you actually reporting on? It's actually quite an interesting thing. So at least you need to know the ratio, and that's one thing. And obviously test data, always the good old one. We need to have the amount of data, the amount of the size of the volume of information that we need to simulate. That can be quite challenging at times. We are unable to get that volume of data to really check how the environment works under stress. But would just comment on those two.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to add on that as well, I think one of the most important things, obviously, is funding. I hope there are CIOs here and CFOs who are listening. Look, let's not kid ourselves. To do performance testing, it's not a cheaper exercise as well. But the price that you're going to pay of not doing it, I think it's tenfold. So we need the people who are responsible for funding to provide that funding to start these initiatives, to start these capabilities within organizations, and you will reap the benefits in the end. I think those return on investment will come later when you have happy customers that are frequently coming into your site. I'm a frequent user of Fullwest's website because I know it performs.
Leela, a little earlier on during one of your slide presentations, you spoke about measuring application performance, and I think one of the metrics you used was response time. Could you add other metrics as well, like production incidents over time, recurrence, business results, etc., or would you just be on performance time?
No, it's a lot of monitoring. So I listed the types. So one is infrastructure related monitoring. So that will be your memory utilization and CPU and all those type of metrics on the infrastructure. You also want to measure your simulated user response time. You also want things like hits per second. So how many hits can a website allow per second? Like, for example, we are in this webinar. How many users are able to write chat messages without things being blocked? Or how many users are logged in on this platform without any problems on this platform? Or us having our videos on all concurrently? How does the network work? So there would be network related metrics. It will be the quality of rendering that is happening on the screen. There's very, very detailed metrics as well that you can break down to the database level, or how information is being, the wait time, the queuing time. It's a whole spectrum of monitoring that one can get. And you want to bring all that information. The challenge often is to bring all that information together for it to make sense. And that's the analytics part.
Okay. Caswell, before we wrap up, we've got just under a minute or so left. What would you say as advice to those who want to go back to their teams, the stakeholders, the CFO, or anyone else who's handling the budget, in terms of the important factors that should be you looked at or considered in selecting an organization's performance tools from your experience?
So there are a few things that we looked at. Firstly, we want to have the best tools in the market that can fulfill our needs. So we do look at the market, what's commonly used in the market, and then we use the Gartner quadrants in terms of like tools. The next one, which is for me is the most important, is what are the pool base of resources that can utilize that tool? Because you may get a tool and then you don't have people to use it, and then it's just a useless tool. Even if it's the best in the market, if you don't have people to use that tool, it's useless. So we look at the market in terms of human resource that we can get. That's the second one. And the other one, I think, is not the biggest driver, is obviously is the cost of that tool. And that's where we start comparing various tools in terms of like what give us the best score in terms of cost, people, and obviously the rating or the performance of that tools in the market.
Yeah. Leela, we've got a few seconds left, and I want to squeeze in this one for the benefit of our delegates. The question says, there's been more conversations doing the rounds about performance tests at a unit level. How do you achieve this to get a meaningful result?
Sure, great question, Rob. So as I explained, I mean, I can't get into too much of the details now, but we have to really just take our performance testing scripts to component level. As you know, in the unit testing world, it's component and services. So you will have to just have tools that support that. And often it's like functional checks that you're doing, like let's say, for example, you're using a behavior-driven or test-driven approach. So when you write a little feature file or feature test, you want that test to also be run from a performance standpoint and write little scenarios for unit testing, simulating things. Tools like JMeter as well will allow you to do that. So definitely that conversation is happening, and we need to carry on doing that. And that's where functional world and is also crossover, is now being merged into the performance world, because we're leveraging those small functional scripts to test from a performance standpoint as well for unit testing. That's the shortest answer I can get.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, Lila Putin, who is a performance and security testing advisor, and Caswell Mkonto, who is the head of testing at Woolworths. It's really been an informative and engaging conversation. Do remember that the recording will be emailed to you at the end of the event. Thank you so much for joining us, and of course, thank you to our sponsor, iOCO, for making this conversation possible. Until next time, goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.